Once upon a time, in Lapland, there lived a young queen named the Snow Queen. But how did she become the Snow Queen? And why is she the Snow Queen? Is the original story darker than the Disney version called Frozen that we all know today? It's time for me to answer all these questions and more, since this is ASMR. Aaron, back at it again with another daily video to help you relax. So lay back and enjoy the ride. I hope this read helps you get you through your day. Or even better, I hope this video helps you gently fall asleep. I can't wait to get started. This is the tale of the Snow Queen. The Snow Queen in 7 stories. Story the first, which describes a looking glass with broken fragments. You must attend to commence of the story, for when we get to the end we shall know more than we do now. And a very wicked hobgoblin, he was one of the very worst, for he was a real demon. One day, when he was in a merry mood, he made a looking glass which had the power of making everything good or beautiful that was reflective in it almost shrink to nothing, while everything that was worthless and bad looked increased in size and worse than ever. The most lovely landscapes appeared like boiled spinach, and the people became hideous and looked as if they stood on their heads and had no bodies. The continuous were so distorted that no one could recognize them. Even one freckle on the face appeared to spread over the whole of the nose and the mouth. The demon said this was very amusing. When a good or boyish thought passed through the mind of anyone, it was misrepresented in the glass. And then how the demon laughed at his cunning invention. All who went to the demon school, for he kept the school, talked everywhere of the wonders they have seen, and declared that people could now for the first time see what the world and mankind was really like. They carried the glass about everywhere, till at last there was not a land nor people who had not been looked at through this sordid mirror. They wanted even to fly with it up to the heavens to see the angels, but the higher they flew, the more slippery the glass became, and they could scarcely hold it, till at last slipped from their hands, fell off the earth, and was broken into 1,000,000 pieces. But now the looking glass caused more unhappiness than ever, for some of the fragments were not so large as a grain of sand, and they flew about the world into every country. When one of these tiny atoms flew into a person's eye, it stuck there unknown to him, and from the moment he saw everything through a distorted medium, or could see only the worst side of what he looked at, for even the smallest fragment retained the same power which had belonged to the whole mirror. Some few persons even got a fragment of the looking glass in their hearts, and this was very terrible, for their hearts became cold like a lump of ice. A few of these pieces were so large they could be used as window panes. It would have been a sad thing to look at our friends through them. Other pieces were made into spectacles. This was dreadful. For who wore them? For they could see nothing either rightly or justify. At all, this was the wicked demon laughed till his sides shook. It tickled him so to see the mischief he had done. There were still a number of little fragments of the glass floating about in the air, and now shall hear what happened with one of them. Second story, a little boy and a little girl. In a large town full of houses and people, there's not room for everybody to have even a little garden. Therefore, they are obligated to be satisfied with the few flowers in flower pots. In one of the large towns lived two poor children who had a garden something larger and better than a few flower pots. They were not brother and sister, but they loved each other almost as much as if they had been. Their parents lived opposite to each other in two gardens, where the roofs of neighbors' houses projected out towards each other, and the water pipe ran between them. In each house was a little window, so that anyone could step across the gutter from window to the other. With parents of these children had each large wooden box. In each they cultivated kitchen herbs for their own use, and a little rose bush in each box, which grew splendidly. Now, after a while, the parents decided to place these two boxes across the water pipe, so that they reached from one window to the other, and looked like two banks of flowers. Sweet peas dropped over the box, and the rose bushes shot forth long branches, which were trained round in windows and clusters together, almost like a triumphal arc of leaves and flowers. The boxes were very high, and the children knew they must not climb upon them without permission, but they were often, however, allowed to step out together and sit upon their little stools under the rose bushes, or play quietly. In the winter, all this pleasure came to an end, for the windows were sometimes quite frozen over. But then they would warm copper pennies on the stove and hold the warm pennies against the frozen pane. There would be very soon a little round hole through which they would peep, and soft bright eyes of a little boy and little girl would beam through the hole at each window as they looked at each other. The names were Kay and Gerda. In summer, they could be together with one jump from the window, but in winter, they had to go up, down the long staircase, and out through the snow, for there they could meet. See, there were the white bees swarming, said Kay's old grandmother, one day when it was snowing. Have they a queen bee? Asked the little boy, for he knew that the real bees had a queen. To be sure they have, said the grandmother. She is flying here, where the swarm is thickest. She is the largest of them all, and never remained on earth, but flies up to the dark clouds, often at midnight, through the streets of the town, and looks in at the window. And the ice freezes on the plains into the wonderful shapes that look like flowers and castle. Yes, I have seen them, said both children, and they knew it must be true. Can the Snow Queen come here? Asked the little girl. Only let her come, said the boy. I'll set her on the stove, and she'll melt. Then the grandmother smoothed his hair and told him some moral tales. One evening, when little Kay was at home, half undressed, He climbed on a chair by the window and peeped through the little hole. A few flakes of snow were falling, and one of them, rather large than the rest, aligned on the edge of one of the snow flower boxes. The snowflake grew larger and larger, till at last it became the figure of a woman, dressed in garments of white gaze, which looked like millions of starry snowflakes linked together. She was fair and beautiful, but made of ice, shining, glittering ice. Still, she was alive. Her eyes sparkled like bright stars. There was neither peace nor rest in their glance. She nodded towards the window and waved her hand. The little boy was frightened and sprang from the chair. At the same moment, it seemed as if a large bird flew by the window. On the following day, there was a clear frost, and very soon came the spring. The sun shone, the young green leaves burst forth. The shallows built their nests, windows were open, and the children sat once more in the garden on the roof, high above all other rooms. How beautiful the roses blossomed this summer. The little girl had learned a hymn in which roses were spoken of. And then she thought of her own roses, and she sang the hymn to the little boy, and he sang too. Roses bloom and cease to be, but we shall the Christ child see. The little ones held each other by hand and kissed the roses, and looked at the bright sunshine, and spoke to it as if the Christ child were there. Those were splendid summer days. How beautiful and fresh it was out amongst the rose bushes, which seemed as if they had never left off blooming. One day, Kay and Gerda sat looking at a book full of pictures of animals and birds, and then just as the clock in the church tower struck 12, Kay said, "Oh, something has struck my heart," and soon after, "There is something in my eye." The little girl put her arm around his neck and looked into his eyes, but she could see nothing. "I think it is gone," he said, "but it was never gone. It was one of the bits of the looking glass. That magic mirror of which we have spoken, the ugly glass which made everything great and good appear small and ugly, while all that was wicked and bad more visible. Every little fault could be plainly seen." Poor little Kay had also received a small grain in his heart, which very quickly turned a lump of ice. He felt no more pain, but the glass was there still. "Why do you cry?" said he at last. "It makes you look ugly." "There is nothing the matter with me now, oh see," he cried suddenly. "That rose is worm-eaten, and this one is quite crooked. After all, they are ugly roses, which like the box in which they stand," and then kicked the boxes with his foot and pulled off 2 roses. "Kay, what are you doing?" cried the little girl. And then, when he saw how frightened she was, he tore off another rose and jumped through his window, away from little Gerda. When she afterwards brought out the picture book, he said it was only fit for babies in long clothes. And when the grandmother told any stories, he would interrupt her with "but," or when he could imagine it, he would get behind her chair, put on a piece of spectacles, and imitate her very cleverly to make people laugh. By and by, he began to mimic the speech and gait of a person in the streets. All that was particularly or disagreeable in a person, he would imitate directly, and people said, "That boy will never be clever. He is a remarkable genius." But it was the piece of glass in his eye and the coldness in his heart that made him act like this. He would even tease little Gerda, who loved him with all her heart. His games, too, were quite different. They were not so childish. One winter's day, when it snowed, he brought out a burning glass. Then he had held up his tail of a blue coat and let the snowflakes fall upon it. "Look into the glass, Gerda," he said. And then she saw how every flake of snow was magnificent, and it looked like a beautiful flower or a glittering star. "It was not clever," said Kay, "and much more interesting than looking at real flowers. There is not a single fault in it, and the snowflakes are quite perfect till they begin to melt." Soon after, Kay made his appearance in large thick gloves, with his sledge at his back. He called upstairs to Gerda, "I've got to leave to go into the great square, where the other boys play and ride." And away he went. In the great square, the boldest among the boys would often tie their sledges to the country people's carts and go with them a good way. This was the capital. But while they were all amongst themselves, and Kay with them, a great sledge came by. It was painted white, and in it sat someone wrapped in rough white fur and wearing a white cap. The sledge drove twice round the square, and Kay fastened his own little sleigh to it. So that went away, he followed with it. It went faster and faster right through the next street, and then the person who drove turned round and nodded pleasantly to Kay, just as if they were acquainted with each other. But whenever Kay wished to loosen his little sleigh, the driver nodded again. So Kay, still though, drove away through the town gate. Then the snow began to fall so heavily that the little boy could not see a hand's breadth before him. But still they drove on. Then he suddenly loosened the cord so that the large sled might go on without him. But it was for no use. His little carriage held fast, and away they went like wind. Then he called out loudly, but nobody heard him, while the snow beat upon him and the sledge flew onwards. Every now and then it gave a jump, as if it were going over hedges and ditches. The boy was frightened and tried to say a prayer, but he could remember nothing but the multiplication table. The snowflakes became larger and larger, till they appeared like white chickens. All at once they sprang on the side of the great sledge, stopped, and the person who had driven it rose above. The fur and the cap, which were made entirely of snow, fell off, and he saw a lady, tall and white. It was the Snow Queen. "We have driven well," she said, "but why do we tremble? Here, creep into my warm fur." Then she seated him beside her in the sleigh, and as she wrapped the fur around him, he felt as if he were sinking into a snowdrift. "Are you still cold?" she asked, as she kissed him on the forehead. The kiss was colder than ice. It went quite through to his heart, which was already almost a lump of ice. He felt as if he were going to die, but only for a moment. He soon seemed quite well again, and did not notice the cold around him. "My sleigh! Don't forget my sleigh!" was his first thought, and then he looked and saw that it was bound fast to one of his white chickens, which flew behind him, with the sleigh at its back. The Snow Queen kissed little Kay again, and by this time he had forgotten little Gerda, his grandmother, and all at home. "Now you must have no more kisses," she said, "or I should kiss you to death." Kay looked at her and saw that she was beautiful. He could not imagine a more lovely and intelligent face. She had not now seemed to be made of ice, as when he had seen her through his window. She nodded to him. In his eyes, she was perfect, and she did not feel all afraid. He told her he could not mental arithmetic as far as fractions, and that he knew of a number of square miles and the number of inhabitants in the country. And she always smiled, so that he did not know enough yet. And she looked round in vast expanse as she flew higher and higher with him upon a black cloud, while the storm blew and howled as if they were singing old songs. They flew over the woods and lakes, over the sea and land. Below them roared with the wild wind. The wolves howled, and the snow crackled. Over them flew the bank screaming crows, and above all shone the moon, clear and bright. And so Kate passed through the long winter's night, and day by day he slept at the feet of the Snow Queen.